Hey, good afternoon. It's Doug Stein with PPE Advantage here in Chicago, and I am fortunate enough to be joined by Steve Ardagh, and he's out in Lake Tahoe. I'm jealous because I'm in Chicago. And Steve's originally from New Zealand, which we've just shared a little moment. I spent a little time there when I lived in Australia. It's a beautiful country, so I'm sure you miss that. We got together because we share some similar interests and passion about nitrile gloves. And Steve and I were talking off camera, and we were just talking about, who thought they'd ever grow up and be into nitrile gloves. It's not like a boyhood dream of any kind, but here you are. So I thought I really wanted to highlight some of the things that you're doing at Eagle Protect, because it's very unique. You truly are a professional in this business, and I kind of wanted to bring that to light. You're doing some things that nobody's doing, which must be the Kiwi in you. But so I thought I'd get you on camera and we could talk about that a little bit. So thanks so much for taking the time.
Well, thanks, Doug. Thanks for having me on, and thanks too for all the work you've done in the last year or two to expose some pretty bad things going on in the industry, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And it was and getting the CNN and various other people involved was pretty awesome as well. So
thanks, man.
Well done.
Thank you.
Yeah, we think we're I guess, to jump in without you even asking a question, I guess, is we're just, our history goes back 16 years in the PPE industry, mostly gloves. We saw an opportunity in New Zealand years ago to help the industry there, the food industry there, be safer. 50% of New Zealand's GDP is export food. So they rely on it being safe and good quality, and they send it all around the world. I don't know about it now, but in the old days, they could produce a nice leg of lamb in New Zealand and send it to the UK cheaper than a UK farmer could, which used to upset the Europeans a lot. So it's a very efficient industry, but we saw there was no expert, if you like, in the PPE industry to help them out. So we just started there, and we've grown to sell our products to around 80% of the primary food companies in New Zealand.
Wow, well
so we're
done.
a major part of that industry. And then we looked, what do we do next? And we looked across to the largest market in the world, which was the USA, and said we really need to get on to the US and save their food industry one glove at a time. And then once we've done that, we'll move on to the medical industry, which needs work as well. And that probably sounds a little bit arrogant, but what we try and do is help people use less of a better product. And when we say better product, it means better product from good factories, good supply chains, good quality materials, safe, and then minimize the effect of them on the environment as much as we can by using less.
That's awesome. So you have a huge background in PPE, which is kind of an anomaly in today's PPE world, because everyone came from somewhere else, including myself. So you were already an expert, well entrenched and with a huge background in nitrile gloves in New Zealand. And I know they do a ton of export on food there. So I'm sure that has been good for you. And now you moved over to the US, but you do some things that are really unique. You do, while everybody was just struggling to get product, you were doing it in a completely different way, like ethically sourcing and making sure everything was certified and traced back. And you talk about the fingerprint, of the glove, knowing where the MBR came from, knowing exactly where that MBR went in the factory and how it got, to where you are. And you've done some just insane stuff on testing other product in the marketplace, which I'm super interested in. So I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I probably could for several hours. So, go and get a cup of coffee if you're watching this. But no, we decided a long time ago that the industry was pretty lazy, and with all due respect to those people in it, they just supplying a product. And vinyl gloves is a classic, which we'll probably talk about at some stage, where the US still uses a lot of vinyl gloves, PVC gloves, in the food industry. Most of the rest of the world stopped that or banned that a long time ago, because they're just not suitable. They're not food safe, and they're also terribly bad for the environment in lots of different ways. So we started talking about that, and we talked to a couple of glove companies, and they'd say, we know they're bad, but that's what the customer wants. And I said, that's not what the customer wants, that's what you're giving them. And they just want a cheap, good glove. And there's lots of options now, as you know, with TPEs and poly gloves and that sort of thing. So, but that's another story. But we're certified B Corp, which for people who don't know is a certification that's really hard to get, especially for a glove company that is around just ethical business. It's about people, planet, profit. So when we make a decision, we need to have profit. We look at the people and the planet and how do we make it better for everybody. We sort of like to say it's like an old-fashioned business where, you know, the general store is part of a town, is the centre of the town, and it used to contribute by offering employment, good products, sponsor the local baseball team or whatever. And so that's what we think business should return to, be mindful of the community it's in and be returning back to the community, but making a profit. You know, unashamedly, it's got to be profit driven, because otherwise you can't do anything. But I'd been to several factories way back when, in the early 2000s, and before I even started the company. And the first one I went to, I remember, and well, I won't say where it was perhaps, but I went to it and it just stunk of, and you've probably been to some of these factories, it stunk of acid and chlorine, you know, which is part of the process. The workers had masks and other respirator equipment, but it was all hanging on the wall. They never used it. But you know, I guess there was a box they ticked somewhere which said they had it. And I went into the packing room, and this is the first packing room I'd seen for gloves, and there were piles of gloves on tables, which is reasonably normal back then. And there were groups of ladies in particular around the table packing them into hundreds and lots of 25, so there'd be 25 and then 25. And one guy's job was to walk around the rooms and get the cockroaches and the flies off the gloves before they were packed into the boxes. And it's just, and they were packed into medical examination grade boxes headed for the States. But of course, nobody checks gloves on arrival into the US or anywhere for that matter. New Zealand is the same. And so no one's seen if these gloves are clean, if they actually do adhere to the FDA food compliance or medical compliance. They did once when they got the test, but do they as time carries on? And we've got lots of examples of gloves that have come into the US that are dirty. We tested 2,800 different gloves over the last 3 or 4 years, with a range of tests that we've developed to do this. So we do that on our own gloves now, or on some of our own gloves. We're expanding it across the range, lot tested. And we found everything from, and these are 25 different brands of gloves entering the US. We've taken them before they're opened, tested them. We found 280 different pathogens, some not so harmful, some very harmful, like E. coli, Listeria, Salmonella. Found feces, and 69%.
I don't want to dwell on poop, but that's a big freaking deal.
Yeah,
I think you said something like 69% of the gloves you tested had fecal matter on them.
Yep. So basically, 7 out of 10 gloves in a box, or 7 out of 100 in a box, had fecal matter on them across these brands. And you know, it's 2,800 tests. So it's a reasonable sample. You know, we could do more, and you know, and it's probably unfair on some brands and too good for other brands. But you know, as you know, there's all sorts of stuff comes into the country from all sorts of countries. So, but I mean, the worrying thing was 46% of the gloves had human fecal matter on. The rest of the fecal matter was things like cockroaches and mice and rats and other vermin. And I guess the thing that is really worrying is then you go to the dentist or the doctor, or even get a hamburger or something, and that's then being potentially transferred to you. And as we say, you know, every day, every single American has contact with a disposable glove, unless they're in an isolation chamber somewhere, because if you've eaten, that food has had some sort of disposable glove handling it. Obviously, you know, if you've been to medical centres and those sort of things. So that's why when I go to a dentist or a doctor, I take my own gloves. Which raises my eyebrows, but yeah, I'm not having someone else's glove on my throat. So
that's hilarious. That's so good, Steve. That's so good. Listen, we've got a few customers. If you know, then you know I can absolutely see it. So you know, look, that was shocking when you told me that. Look, I've been kicking around in Asia for 30 years, and I have seen some horrendous factory conditions. You know, they're getting better over time for things that I used to do, from handbags to fashion. But but still, I've seen it. And some of that stuff you can't unsee. And I had no idea really, who would have known that that's happening in places that are deemed by the FDA to have, medically sound products. So when you told me that, that got my immediate attention. I mean, we've seen some of the horrific pictures and videos that have come out, with gloves going in washing machines and things, but that's not even the case. What you're talking about, top brands that have these older facilities in different parts of Asia. And, they're very susceptible to, bending rules, not wearing the right equipment, not having clean facilities. It's just kind of the nature of that manufacturing culture over there. So, that study that you've done, and didn't you say it was getting published or something in January?
Yeah, we've got it being published in the first quarter of next year. We're hoping January. We've been doing this for 5 years now. We started off with vinyl gloves because we stopped selling vinyl gloves about 5 years ago. And one of the reasons was, and this gets a wee bit complex, but one of the reasons was we found that vinyl gloves are about 3 or 4 times better at transferring pathogens than nitrile gloves. And it's to do with the surface free energy of the glove, and there's all this electrostatic stuff. But if you've got a PVC glove on and you put your hand down and touch the listeria, it's got 3 or 4 times more chance of getting stuck on that glove and going somewhere else than a nitrile glove. And so there's all this sort of really deep science that our microbiologist has been working on over these years. And then it morphed into when we started testing these gloves, we found all these horrible results. And I mean, as I say, it's not the whole industry, but it's the manufacturers. And I won't name any names, obviously, but I've been to factories in various parts of Asia of really good brands, but they've been put under pressure for price, so they just take some shortcuts. They'll put 95 gloves in a box of 100, for example. They'll put 10 to 15% chalk in the mix to reduce the cost of the raw material. All these sort of things. And then I went to one factory and I asked to look at the wash tanks, and they said, it's too dangerous. And I said, well, I really want to look at them because they're up. You've probably seen the glove, the glove thing winds around like this. I eventually got to the wash tanks that are up high and they're empty. And because they were saving money by not having hot water in the wash tanks to wash the gloves. And the washing is important because it leaches out some of the nasty chemicals that are put in the glove to make them. And then the hot water treatment sort of leaches out the chemicals. So by the end of the run, they're safe. So when they don't do that, then there's potential for, biohazards, chemical hazards for the wearer and potentially for the person getting the product being worn, touched. So there's all these sort of things. So I guess what we're trying to do is just raise awareness that a glove is not a glove. There's lots of science that goes into gloves.
Right.
Some of the new gloves coming out are incredible in terms of their thinness and dexterity and strength. So there's a lot of good science being done. The trouble is, there's always somebody who's, will tell a lie or try and get away with the shortcut.
Right.
And that's the problem. So, we're making progress. We've got some really awesome customers in the US, and we're trying to get this. We'll get this paper published. We presented at the International Association for Food Protection this year in Phoenix, and that was pretty well received, by the scientific community, and they can see that the science is there. It shows what we're doing, and I think it'll make a big difference. It's probably
your ultimate goal is to get vinyl banned in the US, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about banned, but because that's especially Americans, no offense, don't like being told what to do.
Right.
But I think if we can raise awareness, and we went to Costco, for example, and told our story, and they changed because they could see the reasons to do that. And the other thing is that people say, oh, the nitriles are more expensive. But if you've got a glove that doesn't rip or rips very, 1 in 1,000, for example, compared to a glove that will rip 15 or 20% of the time, the economy is still there. Your cost per month is probably less. Right. I mean, obviously, pandemics aside, when nitrile prices are now dropping fast, so we're getting back to somewhere near pre-pandemic levels. Yeah. So they've become much more economically viable, and even it's the last, I like to call it the thin blue line between you and a big problem. If you're a food business or medical business and you waste money or save money on a glove, that could be the disaster that takes the company down or ruins your brand for years.
Yeah, that's true.
Large foodborne illness outbreaks.
Well, thinking about vinyl, that's basically made with PVC. And again, I was in the handbag business for many years, going back 20 years or so. And they basically banned PVC to make handbags, because it's got a cancerous element to it. And that started years ago and was spearheaded by, a lot of groups out of California. And I remember going through it when we used to make all our handbags out of PVC if they weren't leather, and then that had to change to polyurethane instead of, and there was leads and paints and stuff that went into it. But I just saw a pretty significant article, and I think I posted on LinkedIn about all the phthalates that are being found in vinyl gloves that have made their way into the US during the pandemic, because everyone was so price conscious and just buying anything they could. And of course, the Chinese food test that's done is nowhere near like the US food test, and nobody's even paying attention to that stuff. So phthalates are very dangerous. And there was an article about McDonald's and Pizza Hut and where they had done some tests, and the food that was coming out of that, it had pretty high levels of phthalates because of the gloves, and the source was their vinyl gloves. So I completely see your point. Now, you're doing some things. Again, let's talk about what you're doing, because I want to make sure that I give you plenty of time to showcase the extraordinary things that you're doing to make sure that you're selling a product above and beyond what everybody else is doing. You have something called Delta Zero. I tried to delve into that a little bit. And I assume, I'm going to guess that you don't own your own factories in Asia, but you have a deep relationship with the ones that you're working with, and you hold them to strict accountability. So I was just wondering whether we could kind of finish up on that note, a little bit about what Delta Zero is, and a little bit about, again, some of the things that you're doing that's so different to what other people in the industry are doing. Sorry, I just froze a minute.
No worries. No, well, we do. We've got some great relationships with factories, and some are big and some are small one factory companies, and others have 25 or 30. And we've visited them multiple times. Obviously, not recently, unfortunately, with the pandemic. And that's a key, because you'll know better than me that turning up and these places makes a big difference to how you're perceived. You're not just someone on the internet trying to make a deal.
And that's been some of the biggest problem during the pandemic, trying to do regular importing and sourcing. People don't understand what it's like to not be able to go there when you're used to being able to get there and get in front of somebody. Makes a huge difference, like you're saying. Sorry to interrupt, but go ahead. No,
it's exactly, and having a cup of tea or a Chinese white wine or something like that with them is critical to the partnership. So we've been lucky, but we don't do any gloves, any nitriles in China anymore. We've decided that Malaysia and Thailand are a better source. We've got some great factories there we use. We visit them often. We have our own audit system that we borrowed from Patagonia, which is another B Corp and adopted. So that's something we do ourselves. But we also have external auditors go in either at the request of our customers or our own auditors as well. And that's based around all the normal things, but it's also based around labour practices, making sure people are looked after. A lot of the people, as you know, that are working in Malaysia and Thailand have actually come from somewhere else. Myanmar or Indonesia or somewhere. So they're prone to getting mistreated, as we've seen with the likes of Top Glove and Nexter, having their goods banned from the US for a period of time recently. So, Top Glove supplies probably 1 in 4 of the gloves into the US. So that was a major decision by the Customs and Border Patrol to do that. Pretty brave and good on them, I think. These things have to be highlighted. You've come from the rag trade, if you like, or the fashion business, and that was probably had a bad reputation for, and maybe still does, I don't know, but has a bad reputation for worker rights. And the glove industry is really not much better in many ways, because these guys are invisible. And it's getting more automated now, but it was a very, very manual business in terms of packaging and all that sort of thing. So they were prone to abuse and not treated overly well. But so that's it. And so that was part of the thing. We want to have a really clean supply chain, make sure everybody's well looked after. We wanted to make sure the raw materials were safe, because these are things that you know, a meat worker in New Zealand or a server in the States is wearing this all day. So what's in that glove is getting into them. We've got a classic example. One of our now customers was a cannabis producer, cannabis farmer in Washington. We've written up a case study. It's on our website. He got a fine and a recall because they found a carcinogen called OPP. It's got a much bigger name than that, but on his cannabis bud. And they tested everything and they found it came off the gloves. And they tested it again and it was on the gloves. And so this chemical was in the gloves and it had been transferred through to the cannabis flower, a carcinogen. And so he got a recall, and the owner said, the terrible thing is my staff have been wearing that glove for 8 hours a day, every day. You know, what's going into them?
Right.
That's the point. You know, it's just, so there's those sort of things. And that glove was FDA food compliant. So that glove, and the thing with FDA food compliance and medical to a lesser extent is there's no requirement for the glove to be clean, and there's no requirement for the glove to not have holes in them. The only thing that FDA food compliance does is make sure there's a list of chemicals that you're allowed, you're not allowed, the migration, all these sort of things, and it's 4 or 5 pages long. But this glove, even though it had FDA food compliance, it obviously not met that standard because it had this carcinogen in it. And so the real trouble is that we're trusting a factory somewhere outside the States to always make the glove to the same standard as the one they got tested every 1 or 2 years.
That's right.
And that's a big call, because these guys get under pressure for raw, you know, especially over the last 2 or 3 years. Raw materials were short, you know, they probably buy different products. So you're really taking a risk. And that's why we have advocated this testing program that we've called Delta Zero, which was a bad name for a while because of the Delta variant, but it's got nothing to do with that. And
Corona, the beer.
That's right. I'm not sure if it would have been good for sales or bad for sales, but yeah, that's right. That was bad. I'm not a big Corona fan, unfortunately. Sorry, Corona. I'm too much in love with the American IPAs. But New Zealand makes some good IPAs now too. But I have to say, particularly the West Coast, there's a lot of breweries to work your way through here. But anyway,
New Zealand's wine is phenomenal.
Yeah.
Phenomenal.
Yeah, well known.
But anyway,
Sabs and Pinots. So we developed, and it's got it's a five layered lot testing system is what we want to say. So we test. We've got 2 of our brands at the moment being tested, and it'll expand to across the whole range. We just, you know, we're a small company. We can't afford to be doing everything at once. So as we grow, we can expand it across the range. And what it does, it tests everything from the physical characteristics of the glove through to the bioburden and the constituents of the glove, so the raw materials. So we get the original recipe from the factory. We run what they call a GCMS, gas chromatography and mass spectrometry over it. It produces this fingerprint, spikes and troughs, which is all the chemicals and things inside the glove. So every time we get another one of those gloves, we can test it to make sure it's the same as the original one. So the gloves are always consistent. When all our gloves, each brand of our gloves, so we've got sensitive, for example, or fine tough, they always come from the same factory. We don't mix factories. We say our gloves are like a fine Scotch whiskey, a single source.
Right.
So whereas, you know, some companies will have on the box made in Thailand, Malaysia, China, you know, on the same box. So, which we don't think, because you can't have a consistent quality. We keep saying, you know, when people use these gloves, this is their tool of trade. So this is the same as a carpenter's hammer, or, you know, or a woodsman's axe. And so they need the same product every day that suits their job to do their job well. And some of the people we supply are incredibly skilled, you know, meat workers and food processing, you know, as simple as it may sound, their jobs are incredibly skilled. So we do that, and you know, that's where we picked up this bioburden or pathogens on the gloves. So one of the interesting things is it's never really been tested before. There are some tests done on gloves, but we found a huge amount of pathogens on the inside of the gloves. And the reason that is the inside of the glove is outside as it goes through the process. So as you know,
that's right. That's right.
So that's getting washed with dirty water, or, you know, contaminated water, or water that's not been filtered properly. And that's where the pathogens are finding access to the glove. And then the glove gets turned inside out, so it's a nice little safe spot for them. and so on it goes.
So amazing. It is so detailed. And it's complex, isn't it? It really is.
Yeah, I mean it is, and that's what we're trying. It's a glove is not a glove. We often go to people, and I went to talked to an organic ice cream producer in San Francisco a few weeks ago about it, and just chatting and sort of bending his ear, and he said, I've been in this business 10 years and I've never thought about gloves. And I said, that's our problem. I mean, people just assume they pull a glove out of a box and it has all these magical qualities of cleanliness,
Right.
safety, and that's not necessarily the case. And so that's all we're trying to raise the profile of, is just, one of the ironies is the glove is seen by the FDA as a zone 1 food safety item, which means it has a level of testing like the cutting board or the ham knife or one of those sort of things. And the irony is people will be testing the other zone 1 food safety items, but they won't test the glove when they go and do a swab. They'll do a swabathon, as they call it, around the retail area or the food service area, and they don't test the glove because it's sort of invisible in their mind. So right. Even though it's categorized as the same thing. So it's interesting. It's we're just sort of bashing away trying to raise the awareness of it. And, we think the food industry is really at a turning point in particular, but medical as well. In that the pandemic has made people look at everything a second time, a lot closer. Some of the shenanigans that have been going on with the glove industry has made people think again about getting a safe and reliable supply chain partner for that.
Certainly should have raised the awareness. It's been it's been the thing of movie making, to be honest, just ridiculous, right?
It is. You could probably make a thriller out of it. And so,
right.
I mean, I'm sure there's a lot we don't know, or maybe but that has been going on behind the scenes as well.
Yeah, it's exhausting. Anyway, listen, I am super impressed at your efforts, at your company, at the positions that you're taking, at your level of knowledge. Just an absolute pleasure to finally spend a little bit of time with you. You should be really proud of what you and your team are doing. And, all I can say is, wow, amazing. Yeah. So thanks so much for sharing that information with me. I learned a lot. Do you, by any chance, if you're getting involved with food service and stuff, do you by any chance come to Chicago for the restaurant shows?
We go to Chicago often. The Food Safety Summit is there. There was awesome. The Next, the convenience store, was there a few weeks ago.
Great.
I mean, Chicago is obviously conference central, isn't it?
Yeah.
So
let me know next time. I would love. Yeah. I'll come to one of your shows, and I would love to see in action, and that would be wonderful.
That'd be great.
Thanks so much.
Never tire of talking about gloves.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Doug.
We can talk about our childhood dream of growing up to be into gloves, right? Anyway, I really appreciate the time, and have yourself a great weekend and a wonderful holiday.
Will do. Thanks, Doug. Appreciate it.